Yeah, so thank you, Taylor, to just come all the way. And maybe before we start our discussion, you can just first introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. My name is Taylor Stockton. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor. Did I get a cheer? Thank you, yes. And I'm sure we'll get into the nitty gritty today, but at a high level, my mandate for the DOL is really to lead our department's view on how AI is reshaping the workforce and really how we can innovate and modernize our own programs to be able to better support workers in navigating the new realities of the future of work. So pretty small task.
Absolutely, and just following on that, my first question is really around how is AI shaping the Americans' work now, and how does it may change in the near future?
Yeah, I think a lot of these conversations that I'm involved in, it starts with how can AI reshape the existing work that we're doing. And I think the real potential that we look at a lot is actually not just how work gets done, but what work is now possible. And I think a lot of the businesses that we're working with are looking at tasks and looking at workflows that previously were not possible, or previously were not possible from a cost effectiveness standpoint to rationalize, that suddenly now when you take the capabilities that AI increasingly has in combination with human expertise, worker expertise, there's a whole new world of what's possible. And so our initial thought in looking at this technology is really that, yes, there will be challenges as there is with any type of change in the world, but that the overarching impact on the workforce and on American workers is a positive one, and is actually a new frontier of opportunities that workers have access to, especially when it comes down to concepts like the American dream, which I know we're talking about today. I think for us, we think about that in a couple different ways. One is about pathways to economic opportunity. And so when we look at the overall sectors impacted by AI and where AI is creating new roles, there are new high-wage, high-demand careers across so many industries that AI is creating, right? And so that means more pathways to the American dream, more pathways to upward mobility. But then the second piece is this oftentimes somewhat ambiguous term that's used, which is productivity, and that AI and technology generally is supposed to increase productivity in some way. But what does that actually mean? And so I think one of the exciting things that we've been seeing is that how that's translating to reality is, for example, when organizations are thinking about incorporating AI, let's use a specific example of a marketing team. Let's say a marketing team has 10 people on it right now and is pushing out 10 press releases a month. And a lot of times when people think about, well, what will the impact of AI be? They keep the output fixed and say, well, maybe we don't need 10 people anymore to do those same amount of press releases. And the reality on the ground that we're seeing is that oftentimes those 10 workers are staying, but the output itself is increasing. And so maybe they're saying, instead of 10 releases a month, let's do 25 releases a month. Or again, back to what's possible now, instead of 10 releases in English, they might say, hey, using AI, we now have the possibility of doing those same 10 press releases, but pushing them out in 25 different languages. Those types of activities that weren't possible before or weren't cost effective before, we're now seeing AI unlock those new activities and that new productivity. And maybe the last thing I'll say on this particular question is that the other form of that productivity is less on an organizational level, I think, but more think about it from an individual standpoint of how AI can actually unlock new ways of entrepreneurship and new ways of small business ownership that may not have been possible before. I think a lot of times we were seeing the types of companies that people had to start where they may have had to go raise venture capital first, or they may have had to go hire 5 to 10 more people first, which may not have been possible given the capital resources they had. Now suddenly AI is democratizing more the access to those entrepreneurship opportunities, the access to small business ownership. And so again, we can talk about the challenges that this may present, but from an overarching standpoint, in relation to the American dream, we are hopeful at the Department of Labor that this is a technology that creates more pathways to the American dream, not less.
Thank you. And government in general has a dual role where that's, on one hand, promoting innovation and then to just empower more ways of supporting American dream, right? On the other hand, that's, to avoid becoming American nightmare. And where that's, how to, when I have a lot of conversation with, companies on responsible AI, and many always just, say the same thing, that we are waiting for the rules, regulations, and all that. Otherwise, then if there's no from the push side, and then, we are doing our way. So from Department of Labor, what are some of the initiatives that, the department has in terms of the dual role and promoting innovation, and from the other side that to protect the laborers and make sure that this is an opportunity for all, not for a few, yeah.
Right, it's a great question, and I would say I agree with the framing of the question that oftentimes there is a waiting game for what government will do and signaling what direction they're going. I would argue that there hasn't had to be much waiting for this administration around a lot of these topics, because I think not only at the Department of Labor, but across the administration up to the White House, within the president's first 100 days, for example, there's been a number of very specific actions around not just AI, but AI as it relates to my world in terms of the labor market and the workforce. And so 2 specific executive orders that came out in late April. One was around AI literacy. It was a specific EO around advancing AI education for American youth. And so it's a cross-federal agency initiative to say, we recognize that for individuals to engage with the opportunities that we think AI will create, it's super important that they have the skills to do that and the comfort engaging with these new types of technologies to be able to then take on those roles, to build agents and manage AI agents. And so AI literacy is a huge, huge priority, not just at the K through 12 level, which there's already been some action around, but the Secretary of Labor has already been clear that at the DOL, we are taking that as a mandate to not just think about youth, but really think about AI literacy skills for all workers and being able to engage with these new opportunities. And so that's one. I think the second one that I would call out was another executive order in April, again, directly from the White House, on modernizing workforce development programs for the jobs of the future. And so again, very much alluding to and identifying areas like AI that are reshaping what jobs look like, and therefore have to reshape what workforce development training programs look like. If we want more and more people, not only directly out of high school and college, but people who are already in the workforce and may need to or may want to retrain, we need to make sure that the training programs that are out there actually develop them with the skills that employers are demanding in this AI-driven economy. And so I would say those 2 pieces are the overall initiatives that have happened up front. The last thing that I'll maybe quickly call out is that we believe that this is going to be an ongoing exercise, though. Something about technology and about AI is that it's not just a one-time, what the technology is already exists, now let's react to it. It's an ongoing analysis, an ongoing evolution of what capabilities are out there and what new initiative government needs to take on. And so I think in my role, certainly, but in a lot of roles across the administration, there are people who are looking at this every day to say, how do we look at the opportunities that AI can present, not just for workforce, but I'll just quickly say, one of the areas that I'm super excited about from a worker standpoint is actually things like health and safety. And so thinking about how AI in more dangerous workplaces can proactively identify hazards and mitigate the different risks that can exist in some workplaces. And so there's a whole spectrum of opportunities, initiatives that I think the Department of Labor is really excited to continue to stay close to.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, that's the new administration have a lot of new initiatives, but also in the meantime, that is looking at probably is learning or understand the economy, understand the need, and then to potentially introducing new programs and all, or approach and all that. So compare U.S. approach, to AI and the future of work with the international experience from other countries, for example, France or other places. How does the U.S. approach differentiate, U.S. from other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question. And again, I a lot of times focus on these conversations about the labor market and retraining and workers, but really from an administration standpoint, this is an overall AI strategy that goes much broader than just labor, as you all know. And I think what the president's been really clear about is that we want America to be the dominant global player on AI innovation, period. And so all of the strategies and policies across federal agencies really represent that overarching goal. And what I would ground that in is that we don't just see that as an opportunity, we see that as an imperative. We see that as an imperative because of economic growth, but perhaps even more importantly, we see that as an imperative for national security reasons, because of how we know AI will reset leverage from a military power standpoint. And so if we ground our discussion and ground our overall strategies in that, I think all of the other policies that come from that become much more clear in terms of what drives them. And what I would just say is how the administration thinks about, if we want to win this AI arms race, as it's sometimes called, there are really three things underlying that we believe we need to win on that will then drive that. One is innovation, the second is infrastructure, and the third is diplomacy. And so maybe just to quickly talk through each of those pieces. On the innovation side, and I think this is perhaps where we'll be most distinct from perhaps the approach that you've seen other countries take, this administration has been tremendously clear that we believe we need to remove barriers to innovation for the tech community, for the private sector, to really drive at the speed that's needed to have the most powerful and responsible, but the technology and the AI that's on the leading edge on the world stage. We think we've seen other approaches on the world stage that have stagnated that growth, that have prevented that growth from going at the pace and the development needed to compete on the world stage. And so that first piece is really innovation and government staying out of the way of the private sector to make sure that we can lead in that world. The second, on the infrastructure side, really gets to this very complex but important conversation on data centers, right? How do we have the right data centers? How do we have the right infrastructure? How do we have the right talent to make sure that innovation can succeed? And then that third piece is AI diplomacy. And again, I think you can see a distinct approach that this administration is taking in comparison to the previous administration, which had many more caps, for example, of exporting some of our more powerful AI technology around the world. This administration has been clear, especially in the Middle East a few weeks ago, that we believe we need to make sure that other countries, especially those investing a lot of capital in this space, like those in the Middle East, we want those players to be operating on the American AI tech stack. And we believe that if they are not operating on the American AI tech stack, that we are directly pushing them into the arms of the Chinese tech stack, right? And so really thinking about, from a geopolitical and diplomacy standpoint, the need to bring these countries into our world, because that is a world where we can control the values and the responsible security measures that are taken on that tech stack that we're building. And so again, it's a very broad and complex conversation, but it is one that even when we do talk about labor implications or other types of more thematic implications, I think it is a good question because it's important to ground it on that overall AI strategy that the White House is taking and how that does relate and differ from other parts of the world.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that this is a complex conversation, and then will be multiple stakeholders and engage this continuous engagement. One question I have is from the private sector engagement, where that's last year and during the Chicago AI Week last year that I hosted a similar conversation with the Chief Innovation Officer of Federal Reserve. And I asked her the similar question, and then around how does the Federal Reserve engage with the private sector, and then to just serve the dual role as protector in the meantime, promoting innovation. So from Department of Labor side, that to address all the opportunities and the potential emerging issues, that how does the department engage with the private sector? Any ongoing initiative or approach?
Yeah, maybe I'll start more broad and then get more tactical and specific. I think from a principle standpoint, good segue from what I just spoke to at the administration level, which is that the way that we're engaging with the private sector right now is really to say, how do we help foster innovation in the private sector by staying out of your way? How can we deregulate? How can we remove some of the red tape that's there to really allow the private sector to prove out these models for innovation and impact that are out there? And so I think that's from a principle standpoint. I think from a more tactical standpoint, especially as it relates to the Department of Labor, one really, really important priority for us right now is the idea of apprenticeships, and specifically registered apprenticeships, which we believe is a really, really proven model to get more people into new careers in a much more rapid and efficient way that doesn't require a college degree, that doesn't require some of these more long-term training programs that exist. And so in that, though, historically, the feedback that we've gotten from the private sector is that things like registered apprenticeships at the federal level have a lot of red tape, that registration takes a lot of time, that compliance is highly burdensome in a way that doesn't make financial sense for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that are out there. And so I think it's a very tactical example of how we are trying to apply that principle to say, how do we still have the right guardrails to make sure that outcomes are there and that there's accountability there to make sure that the outcomes are being created, but that we don't prevent private sector innovation from happening in these areas that we need to for the economy to go in the direction that we need to. Maybe just the last thing I would say from a public-private partnership perspective is that especially as it comes to education and workforce development, the conversations that we are now having with a lot of large companies and employers is that the notion in the world that used to be the case perhaps where employers could wait for educational institutions to train workers and then just show up ready to go in their doors is over. There needs to be a more active role by employers within this talent development world, simply because of how quickly the skills that are needed in the workforce are changing. And so, phrases like the co-creation of talent, the co-development of talent, and the co-investment by employers to make sure that our workforce is being upskilled and reskilled at the pace that it needs to, is the types of conversations that we're having that I think you can only get to through public-private partnership.
Thank you. My last question is really around, the responsible AI side, because, you earlier introduced or mentioned about the unique American approach is pro-innovation, right? And where that's naturally there, we already seen in the court, because we have a publication called the AI 2030 Monthly Court Case Review, and we see that a lot of employer are being sued by the employee. A lot of customers sue their, the companies who are providing service to them, and there's bias and tons of other issues emerging with all the benefits. And so how can we ensure that, while that we are promoting innovation, where that's, the AI development in the US, especially for the laborers, and it's still fair and safe and responsible?
Right. I think there's certainly active legal cases out there too around this issue that I won't comment on specifically, but maybe more generally, we'll say certainly there are always these questions about especially when AI is incorporated into hiring algorithms, for example, but even into other employment decisions across an employee life cycle. Who gets promoted, who gets a raise, who gets transitioned into various departments. And I think there are good and fair questions that come out to make sure that these algorithms aren't perpetuating biases, aren't discriminating against certain groups, which is some of the questions that are being litigated right now. And so those questions should be litigated. We should make sure that there are the right guardrails in place to prevent those biases. And I would also say is that sometimes conversations just focus on that side of the coin. And what I would also point to is that if we look at human employment decisions, right, there's also a lot of bias there, right? And if you look at historically all of the ways where workers have felt discriminated against in the past, there are a lot of ways that it's actually more difficult to identify when we can prove there is bias when it's just a human employment decision. And so I think one of the things that we are excited about is if we can get the right guardrails in place, if we can have the right bias, these technologies like AI within hiring actually have the potential to reduce bias that we are seeing right now. And so I think that's something that we're really excited about. Maybe just the last reflection that I'll end with around a lot of this, though, because I think it's related, is that there's a lot of fear-mongering that you see out there in the headlines around all of the negatives that will come with AI as it relates to labor and workforce development. And I think the approach that the Department of Labor is taking is saying, how do we shift to a mindset of optimism over fear? Because if we focus too much on fear, the second order impact of that we see is too many workers will distrust AI in a way that will actually prevent them from engaging it and seeing the opportunities of it. That will prevent them from engaging in it and sharing in the prosperity of the opportunity and productivity that it will create in the economy. And so, yes, let's have the guardrails. Let's make sure there's no discrimination and no bias. But let's also have a mindset of optimism that can make sure that more workers than ever before are able to access the American dream.
Thank you very much. And round of applause for Taylor. Thank you.